Final Fantasy VIII is a digital collectible card game with some RPG elements from Square Enix, and it will now get reviewed. On the whole, the experience of playing Final Fantasy VIII averages out to be pretty good, but there's a tremendous amount of variability, both on the good end and the bad end. So the combat system is the best implementation of ATB, the Active Time Battle System, ever. It's fast, there's punchiness to it, and there's even some timed attacks to add a little bit of execution and just some flavor to what can sometimes be a little monotonous. More so than any other Final Fantasy, the gauges move quickly. When you put in a command, it gets executed right away, which seems like something that should be given, but is not always. And it works well with the existing mechanics. For example, in Final Fantasy IX, there's quite a bit of pre-animation before a character does something, and time flows during that, and it kind of creates this weird stacking up of you inputting all your character's commands at once, and then it just all... the turn order and all those things get messed up. In Final Fantasy VIII, we don't have that. You tell someone to jump and they just jump. They don't ask how high, they jump, because that's what you asked. There's a junctioning system in the game where they basically used it to replace equipment. You can get spells by drawing them from enemies or refining them from things and attach them to your character's different stats, so like their physical strength, for example. It has a lot of interesting implications, and there's a sort of numeric elegance and, a non-perfect problem for you to solve in terms of, do I put the strongest spell in the game to my strength or my defense? I mean, both are useful. So there's some cool things that come from it, and you wouldn't get that with equipment. You can't, if you find the sword Excalibur, you can only use it as a sword. You can't wear it as a hat. So the decision's made. This has a little bit more flexibility and elegance to it, and it's interesting. The only problem is that it's tied to the drawing mechanic, and how you get the spells is kind of repetitive. I read in an interview a long time ago, and maybe I'm even misremembering it, but they thought people were using summons and magic, and mostly magic, I guess, too much in other Final Fantasy games, so they wanted people to start treating magic with more scarcity, so they thought, well, if you only have 6 meteor spells, you'll really ration those. But then they designed a game system where if you found a way to get meteor spells, you just need to stockpile 100 on everybody. And they didn't think people would do that. They thought, oh, that's not really fun, players won't do that. But the game incentivizes it, so everyone does. That's a real shame. And I even tried on my Let's Play of the game, I tried to avoid drawing a ton, because that's kind of boring to watch, and I tried to focus more on refinement, which is a bit less time consuming, and it just wasn't better. It broke down, and it just blah. So too bad about drawing. It's easy for me to say 18 years after the game came out, they could have just tweaked these little things and this armchair quarterback can design a better game system, but I really think almost anyone could. If you just, let's say we have to keep drawing, you just give every character magic points, MP, like almost every other Final Fantasy game, and then you just have a rule where an enemy, you can only draw a spell from them once. And so the enemies where you can keep encountering them lots and lots, your generic enemies, you give generic spells to. So Fire, Fyra, Fyraga, you can get those pretty easily, but Ultima you can only really get from a boss, and once you draw it once, that character just has it. And we do away with this nonsense of transferring spells from character to character, and maybe you can even throw in a little bit of flavor, like not every character can hold every spell in stock, so maybe Squall doesn't ever get any healing spells. Now all of a sudden there's an interesting difference between the characters, who are, from a statistical point of view, mostly interchangeable. The only differentiating characteristic they have is their limit breaks, really, and some base stats that can kind of vary, but again, it's pretty easy to just drag those wherever you want them to be. The game in general feels kind of like a weird permutation of existing Final Fantasy mechanics, with some changes being good and others being weird. And it feels a bit like Square implemented all of these ideas but didn't really double check under the question, is this fun? They just sort of did things. So we have a lot of mechanics that seem like interesting intellectual tweaks without any investigation into if it makes the game more fun or more interesting or more compelling. And probably the best example is going to be Triple Triad. So Triple Triad's the mini game of Final Fantasy VIII. It's a card game. I remembered liking it, and it's still better than I remembered it. And back in the day, I used to think like, oh, it's only fun when you don't have the random rule, which makes you randomly select your cards, and you know, because normally you could just always just pick the best ones. And there were these other weird rules like same and plus, which were a little hard to understand, and even once I did understand them, they surprise you out of nowhere and totally change up the card game. Now that I'm playing it again, I think it's fantastic, and I like all those rules, and it's great. The problem is, different regions of the game have different rules, so some places play a very simple, highest number wins version of Triple Triad, and others have these tweaks like, oh, if you match 2 numbers to adjacent cards, then you win. You don't need a higher number because you match 2 and you flip the cards and then it's neat. That's all fine and good. We're okay still. Triple Triad's okay. The problem is they have this mechanic in the game where you can mix rules. Okay, that's not a problem either. The problem is it's random which rule gets mixed, and the player doesn't really control it. And even if you don't want to mix rules, the only trick is you just keep trying to play cards with someone, and they say, should we mix rules? And you say, no. And then you try again. And then there's just a certain number of times, and it changes every time. There's a certain number of times they'll ask, you know, hey, should we change rules? And you just have to keep saying no until finally they stop asking, and then now rules won't mix. That's ridiculous. They give you a yes or no option. Why can't they just say, yes, let's play with mixed rules. No, let's just play with your rules. Or no, let's not play at all. Like, why can't you do that? I don't understand why no one in the room would ask the question. And if what they wanted to do was make the game take longer or have more emphasis on Triple Triad, then it didn't work, because these things make it less fun to play the game and less fun to really explore it. And then people just skip it entirely, because this whole card game is optional. If you play it lots, you can get access to cards, and then you can refine items out of them, which seems weird, but makes sense in a Yu-Gi-Oh sort of way. But again, most people just walk away on this one, because it gets weird. And walking away from weird crap in Final Fantasy VIII is going to be a recurring theme, and something lots of people can relate to, because lots of people started the game and never finished. Which is interesting because the story. So the story has multiple layers, and some are a mess and some are brilliant. Superficially, like the plot, just the things that happen, that's where the mess is. The deeper themes are actually amazingly well done. There's sorceresses and time compression and garden and seed, and it's a little messy. It's also a little bit better than other crap we've been fed lately, like the seas and foul seas and cocoon and so on. Like, the garden and seed kind of make a little bit of sense. There's weird stuff too. Norg is weird. There's a guy who, well, he's a Shumi. Shumis are weird. His name is Norg. Not capital N, capital N-O-R-G, thank you very much. So that's weird, and there's these Moombas, and that's kind of weird too. And I say this thinking chocobos are normal, so let's just remember where the bar is set, and we're straight into Crazy Town. So the plot, if I could explain it, I'm going to try to sum it up, so we're in spoiler territory. A child soldiering organization that takes orphans and trains them to be mercenaries gets pulled into a conflict with a sorceress, and that's okay because this sorceress, when she was good, founded the idea of Seed with the real purpose of not being mercenaries. That's just so they can make some side money. Their real purpose is to kill sorceresses just in case she goes bad or because she knew it was going to happen. Anyway, whatever. They start getting into it, and really that sorceress is being possessed by another sorceress from the future who wants to compress all time, past, present, and future into a single point. So she's the only one who can exist then. And then at the same time, the main character is being sent back in time to relive parts of his father's life. He doesn't know it's his father, but it's his father. And to try changing the past because a woman who is that guy's, the main character's like de facto sister, like stepsister, and his father's kind of like de facto niece, you know, Uncle Laguna. They're not really uncle and niece, but you know, they have the relationship of that. And she wants to change the things that happened in her past, but then gives up, and then she's able to use her power to send people's consciousness back in time, to combine it with possession to send the heroes into time. I'm not exaggerating. Like, this is me not trying to make it sound crazy. This is me trying to sum it up as best I can. It's a mess, but it's okay. Because Final Fantasy VIII is a game that gets a large number of little things wrong, but a small number of big things really, really right. That's the superficial stuff, everything I told you. The events that happen in the game are superficial and not that important, and they're weird, but the story is also about a guy named Squall, and it looks like it's going to be a coming-of-age story, but there's a lot more to it than that. It also looks like it's going to be an adolescent romance story, but there's a lot more to it than that. It's about him becoming, who he ought to be, and he does it by giving up his philosophy of autonomy, by the exact opposite means most people come of age. And there's a love story that plays into that, but the love story is secondary to this personal arc this guy named Squall goes on, and it makes the love story and the personal story better. The characters in general are pretty strong. I would have liked to see the other 4 main characters that are in your party through most of the game get a bit more spotlight towards the end. Quistis felt like she was actually a little bit bland. She's just sort of, like, her personality was, she's the oldest, so she's like a little bit more of an authority, but you don't really see lots of that with her either, so I'm not really sure what she likes. Zell is impulsive and a hothead, but he's actually pretty smart, and he shows some serious loyalty to Squall and good initiative when Squall's not around a lot of the time, so he's a really solid buddy. He's your bro. And at first, that is something that Squall really didn't like him for, but again, Zell is your bro always, to the death. We start appreciating him as an audience, and Squall does as well. So that's cool. Irvin is at first just a ladies' man, but we see that despite that, he's actually the most committed member of the group. And there's even an interesting scene where we think we're getting one layer of depth added to his character when he's a sharpshooter and he's cracking under the pressure of having to shoot this person. But there's another layer beyond that. He's the only one who has a really good memory of the group and realizes that the person he's supposed to shoot, I mean, he's an orphan, and this is kind of the mother figure in his life. So technically not his mother, but the only thing he had remotely close to it. And so shooting her with a gun is really hard to do. That's an interesting twist. Selphie at first seems like she's this innocent and happy-go-lucky person who's maybe a bit of a hippie, but actually she's probably a Slytherin. There's a little bit of the right kind of crazy, and there's like a lucidity to her where like you're trying to do this mission and, it involves the president of this country we really hate, and, he's trouble, and she's like, hey, we should just blow him up. She's not wrong. Renault as a character some people find a little bit annoying. I did the first couple times I played the game. I'm really appreciating her more now. People find her annoying because she is pushy and a little bit bossy and gets in over her head a little bit. She's not pushy because she's a pushy person. She's pushy because she sees Squall, the main character, is a guy who needs a push because he's not going to do what he needs to do in a personal sense on his own. And she lacks a lot of the competencies that Squall has, and she sort of knows to defer to him a lot in those areas, and wants to be near him. And he sorts of rubs off on her as well, and so they both grow together. And then Squall I've talked about, but the cliche of Final Fantasy VIII is that, Squall's just this brooding emo guy. I mean, it's not exactly wrong at first where he's sort of this grumpy loner, but the important thing is throughout the game you start realizing why he is that way, and also why he can't remember that he is that way, which makes it really hard for him to change. We see him grow, and by the end he's still the same guy, but so many of his character traits are completely unrecognizable, and it's a beautiful transformation. The storytelling was also pretty nuanced at time. Honestly, something that's pretty missing from modern Square Enix games. We see things like Squall reflects on his childhood as he starts to remember bits and pieces of it. And I mean, he's an orphan, so there's a lot of sadness in it. He remembers this moment where he keeps saying, I'll be okay, because, alone this sister figure to him goes missing. And he keeps saying, it's like, okay, sis, I'll be alone. I'll be okay without you. I'll be able to go on. And he always reflects, I was wrong. I didn't turn out. He doesn't like who he became. He views the trajectory of his life as one that is a failure. And We get to see the transformation of him learn to like let other people into his world because Renoa forces him to, basically, and eventually come to the conclusion that he looks back on his life and that moment of him being sad that his sister left and I'm gonna be okay, and he finally realizes I am gonna be okay. He sees a larger arc. The game actually has a really cool recurring theme, even that like Alone was trying to change this event from the past. She had that power to send people back to send their consciousnesses back into the past. People she knows, she can send their minds back. And she was unhappy with how things went for her as well. And she wanted to change that and realized, well, you can't change the past. The past is actually immutable. It is set in stone. But by perceiving it, what Alone got to see was all these moments she never knew happened. From her point of view, she was taken away when she was a kid, taken away from Uncle Laguna, and that was it. And he showed up one day and rescued her. And she got to see by, sending people into the past and witnessing these events, she got to realize that Uncle Laguna put his entire life on hold. This little girl who wasn't actually his niece, wasn't actually his daughter, but this little girl that he felt this connection with and viewed as his niece. It didn't matter that the biology wasn't there. Like, this is a child that he loved. Put his life on hold, left his wife. He didn't know she was pregnant. She died while he was gone, and he just journeyed and journeyed and journeyed and rescued her and was all about finding her his whole life. And came back home and his wife was dead and he never knew she was pregnant, so he never knew he had a son out there somewhere. And this was his life, and Elone didn't realize how important she was to him. And so by perceiving this past, even though she couldn't change anything, decided she didn't want to. And this is super powerful for people playing the game. Like, maybe you just thought, oh, I like the Final Fantasy VIII story. You don't like it because of that weird time compression crap. I mean, it's maybe an interesting idea, but it's not done well. But this stuff is, and that there's a message of bad things happen, and they are bad, but maybe you want to keep them. And I'm going to talk about the ending now. It's a real shame. A lot of people quit Final Fantasy VIII before they finish it. I did the first 2 times I tried playing through the game. I quit on disc 3. The game definitely slows down there, but if you deliberately try pushing through the plot a little bit faster at that point, it gets back on track quickly enough. And the ending to the game is beautiful. I've said many times that Final Fantasy VI, 7, and 8 all have perfect endings. 6 is this triumphant restoration of things that were lost, and 7 is this ambiguous commentary on the moral nature of humanity, and in a broader sense, a commentary on, what persists of a person after they die. Is there something left? And it has this nice ambiguous ending where it really does come down to your beliefs. Like, depending on what the game helps you to believe, by witnessing the events in it, you determine what the ending means, which is just genius and brilliant and stirring, and it's really beautiful. And FF8 is a happy ending. And after those descriptions I gave about the other ones, that might sound glib and, oh, great, yeah, fine, everybody lived. But it's better than that. It wraps up a story about people who are lonely and in pain and without family, and it brings them together and gives them closure and healing and love. Everything that was lost was able to be restored. Everything they never had, they were able to gain. There are lots of stories about people on personal journeys of redemption in terms of their moral standing, but those rarely go beyond a person's own righteousness. This, on the other hand, is a redemption for the joy in life. And now I'm going to meander a bit to talk about one thing, but it's important. Final Fantasy VIII saw a large share of conspiracy theories about it, and so I want to do a quick review of this part of FF8 subculture and its legacy, because it's important to call out BS when you see it. So there's a fan theory that Squall dies on Disc 1. It's stupid for the obvious reasons that it renders the rest of the game pointless and a hallucination, and for the typical, she woke up and it was all just a dream crap. But it's also a theory that is wrapped up to look like it's clever, and this sort of intellectual dishonesty is something I find alarming. The other big theory was that Renoa is Ultimacia, and it's also tacky, mostly because it undercuts the message of the game, especially the ending, which is its strongest point. But The real crime of both of these ways of looking at the game is it blinds people to what's really there. Remember when Renoa told Squall that he missed out on all of the good things? That's what these ideas do. You see, we've got a game where broken, dysfunctional people go on a painful journey, confront their pasts in very tangible ways, and not only overcome the obstacles in their way, which is kind of normal for a story, but they're actually healed by the process. The status quo isn't restored by our heroes, something much better is brought into existence. Squall is able to reflect on his life, which he previously viewed as a sort of disaster, resulting in him turning into a person he didn't really care for, himself. And instead, all of that is replaced with a realization that it's okay and he's gonna be okay. Alone tried to erase the painful events from her past by changing history. Instead, she learned that accepting the past might have been better anyway, and by looking more closely at that tragedy, what she found was love. Broken people end off not just okay, but better by processing every bad thing that ever happened to them, and while it's painful while they do it, it restores them. And if you're playing the game, you might start to realize that this actually might be true for you, too. A big deal is often made of the fact that Hironobu Sakaguchi was writing Final Fantasy VII when his mother died, and he incorporated a lot of what was going on into the game. What people often overlook is that the next game was Final Fantasy VIII, a story about hurting children with no parents who accept the pain in their lives and by examining it actually discover love. This is a powerful truth that could actually change your life, but screw it, wouldn't it be weird if Squall was dead? That probably is what the people who poured years of their lives making this game wanted you to get out of it. That's what it all means. Alright, so critiquing this game's visual art is tough. The game's old. It aged better than Final Fantasy VII, but that's not really saying much. And I love Final Fantasy VII, but yeesh. The backgrounds in the game are cool. There's some really neat camera angles. There's some practical problems because sometimes it's hard to tell where the exits are and so on, but you know, they did some visually interesting stuff, and a lot of video games now have kind of boring third-person camera angles. They're practical, they're useful, and I'm not saying they should change that, but with these pre-rendered backgrounds, you did get an interesting element of cinematography to the game that is kind of absent nowadays. One weird thing is that the game has pretty good character art, and it's kind of super underused in the interface, and considering how menu-heavy Junctioning basically is, I would have preferred a more visually pleasing UI. Like, it's clean, and it's clean everywhere, even in the battles. That's really clean and ahead of its time with the gauges and the way they're using transparency. It looks good 20 years later, but when you're looking at people and contemplating like the equipment they have, I would have preferred calling off the information that isn't maybe immediately useful and seeing like a more character-driven UI, like something that we see in Chrono Cross or a Tales game. Alright, music. I forgot how great it was, and maybe I actually never appreciated it until now. The thematic use of the score, like to enhance the narrative, is spot on. Fithos Luzek, the way those gibberish words get thrown around is so powerful in this game. You'll have a situation that maybe you think it's going to be happy, and then you'll hear the tune of evil, and you just know. This like a curse has been put on it, and it fits the themes of the game so well that it's like this incantation sounding thing. It's perfect. And there's a lot of super strong songs in it. I always thought, you know, Final Fantasy VI and VII probably had my favorite scores. 14's got a really good one, and I always overlook this, but I mean, going through the entirety of it, it's fantastic. Find Your Way is a song I could listen to on loop for a very extended period of time, and it doesn't get old because it's, I don't know, it's not intrusive. The structure of it's just really good for being listened to for a long time. For the story pieces, actually, they had a little bit of trouble, I think, with keeping it fresh, and that's kind of not the way I would normally expect it to go. Okay, The Reckoning. Almost every negative criticism you will hear is probably true. Almost all of the praise the game gets is probably true too. It's a weird thing, and some people might say this game is polarizing. I don't think that's the case. I think this game itself is bipolar. It has some extremely good qualities and just a ton of not terrible, but bad and weird stuff, and where you just can't quite see what they were kind of trying to go for. At first I thought maybe it was a little rushed. Final Fantasy VII they developed in about a year, but a lot of time was spent preparing, and maybe they sorted out some of the good idea, bad idea stuff, and with 8 they just sort of really wanted to get something out the door. But I don't know, this is all just speculation on my part. But I get the feeling that a little bit of workshopping after the fact could have really bumped this to be a perfect game. When it came out, I think a lot of its strengths were taken for granted, but that Shumi side quest is still really terrible, so let's not be too easy on it. But the big thing is that at the end, when you play it through all the way and get to that ending, it ends on a powerful, resounding 5 out of 5. A lot of people quit before they get there, and that's a huge shame. So the real score is 3 out of 5. It's painful much of the time, it's opaque, it's full of weird crap, but the strengths of the game are the sort of thing that leave a lasting impression on a person, and they're everything you could ever want from a piece of art. Should you play it? Only if you're going to finish it all the way through. If you quit halfway through, you're going to have played a bad game. If you finish it, you will have played a great one.